Off the coast of Los Angeles, the reason you're paying more for everyday items and perhaps struggling to find some in the store? A vital parking lot in the Pacific. Container ships, mostly from Asia, stretching across the horizon.
This is a major challenge, and this is something that's been a major priority for the White House, certainly for our department. It's why the White House set up this task force. And what we're looking at is basically everything between those ships and your shelves that gets the goods to where they need to be. Part of that's things like physical infrastructure. Part of that is, as you say, is labor. And look, obviously it's an incredibly complicated situation. We're talking about global supply chains, and it's mostly private sector systems, but we have a big role to play, and that's why we've been convening all of the different players. For example, held roundtables bringing together everybody who's connected to the ports, the port operators, port owners, labor unions, shipping.
Blah, 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 blah.
76 ships waiting for up to 10 days each to enter the port of Los Angeles or nearby Long Beach.
And remember, a lot of this isn't, when you look at these backups, for example, on the ships, it isn't just about the ships, right? If they're in this photo, that means the ship is there. The question is what's in the way of the container getting off the ship and out to where it needs to be. And a lot of that goes to the other parts of our transportation system. You look at what's going on with trucking. We have some real concerns with the availability of truck drivers. At large truck operators, the rate of turnover for truck drivers has been around 90%. So that's clearly, at least in part, a labor issue. And we're partnering with the Department of Labor to try to establish more apprenticeships and make sure that we're addressing that.
Blah, 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 blah.
Everywhere you look, there's a ship just sitting out here in the water. And 500,000 containers. But this is just one component of the stretched global supply chain that runs from Asian manufacturers across the Pacific to American consumers, now backed up and bottlenecked.
I think I can call a crisis with our ports right now on the West Coast and the East Coast when we have all those ships lined up trying to offload. And by the way, we don't have the trucks to get the stuff off the ports anyway. What can you do about that problem?
So this is a challenge that really stretches across the entire supply chain. If you think about it, if the ships are there, then actually the ships are not where the entirety of the issue lies. It's really everything in between. In addition to issues in shipping, it's everything in between that ship that's waiting for its chance to come into port and the shelf where that product is supposed to wind up in the end. That means the ports themselves. It means rail. It means trucking. It means everything in the movement of those goods. And we do believe there's a role for the federal government to play to help smooth out some of these supply chain issues. It's largely a private sector system. But when the president signed the executive order early this year, when we brought together the White House task force on supply chain disruptions that's working as we speak, to continue addressing these. What we found is that we can play a role as a kind of honest broker, bringing together a lot of the key players in order to take away some of the obstacles to things moving smoothly.
Blah, 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 blah.
Making matters worse, there aren't enough truck drivers to take the goods from the docks to the nation's stores.
The American importer cannot digest all of this cargo into their domestic supply chains. 50% of all truckers licensed to do business at the ports no longer come here.
What is the risk that we will not have the goods on the shelves for Christmas?
Well, look, what we know is that there are short-term actions that we can take that are making a difference already. We just saw, for example, a considerable reduction in the dwell time on rail, the transfer to rail at those ports of LA and Long Beach. By the way, those two ports alone represent about 40% of our containerized traffic. Some of this is a bigger picture, longer term issue that's going to take years and years to address. It goes to the very foundations of how our trade works. But what we're seeing is that piled up next to an issue created by the recovery from the pandemic. We have record traffic at some of these container ports. Part of what's happened is as people's incomes have returned, they're spending that income less on things like going to crowded theaters or restaurants compared to on physical goods, which puts a lot of pressure on our shipping and supply chain resources. So these challenges are definitely going to continue in the months and the years ahead. But we're wasting no time in taking steps that are going to make a difference right away. There's even an envoy whose full attention is on this now, highly respected former deputy secretary from my department, John Percari, who has been working with this White House level task force that I'm co-chairing along with Secretary Vilsack, our agriculture secretary, and Secretary Raimondo, our commerce secretary, to really identify those short-term as well as long-term steps we need to take.
Blah, 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 blah.
It's not just California. New York's ports are also backed up and leading to a shortage of everything from electronics to toys to cars and car parts, building materials, clothing, and sending prices higher.
If you had the infrastructure package signed today, what would be the medium and long-term effects on the problem we're talking about right now with the ports, with the rail system, with trucking?
Well, what we would have is a system that could more flexibly adapt to the challenges of tomorrow. I don't think anybody could have seen the level of impact, negative impact that the COVID pandemic had, but also a lot of the challenges are actually from the level at which income bounced back. And so as you have these shocks and fluctuations, and we don't know by definition what some of the future ones are going to be, what we do know is that when we invest in our ports, and there are billions to support our ports in this package, when we invest in rail safety and efficiency, when we invest in the roads that our trucks go on, and by the way, we should be investing in the labor side. In fact, right now we're teaming up with the Department of Labor to support pathways to apprenticeships to help support that need for more people in the trucking profession. All of those things give us a more resilient and flexible supply chain, no matter what the challenges of tomorrow are going to be, in addition to the challenges that we know of right now that we're facing and wrangling with in the short term.
Blah, 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 blah.
A lot of those holiday gifts you're hoping to give right now may be stuck sitting out here on the water. The question is whether they're going to be offloaded out of those massive containers onto the trucks, onto the rail lines, and to your local store in time for the holidays.
So transportation in the U.S. economy is the single biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, to me, that means we have to be and can be one of the biggest parts of the solution. And one of the exciting things about the president's vision, and I think about this infrastructure package and the companion, the rest of the Build Back Better agenda, is it breaks this idea that you got to choose between economic activity and infrastructure or doing the right thing on climate, and really fuses them together. A good example is the investments we're making in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We know that in order to meet our goals and meet our needs for electrification of cars and trucks, we got to have more of a charging network around this country, and the bill contains the provisions to do just that. There are extraordinary things happening in unsexy areas of infrastructure development, like cement and concrete. You mentioned finding actually carbon negative ways to do that. We're in conversations with the aviation sector about sustainable aviation fuels, since we're going to see more and more electric cars on the road long before anybody comes up with an electric alternative to a jet engine. So we got to make sure that the fuels that go into that are more efficient. We have to regard transportation policy and infrastructure policy and climate policy as really being one and the same. And you're going to see that reflected as we prepare for the international COP26 talks in Glasgow next month, and really throughout this administration in this decade.
Blah, 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 blah.
Subscribe to the Dummy Funnies now!